Welcome to the Football Science Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the physiology, biomechanics and anatomy of the world of football. This episode we're going to be talking about the female athlete and the women's game of football. So hopefully we'll share some insight into my experience winning the game and maybe some reflections I've had. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host Joe. So Joe?
Yeah, well, obviously we're going to be talking about the women's game, and we've seen a massive rise in popularity for female football, which is amazing to see. We obviously seen the Lionesses massive win, which has obviously helped, but it's not just been a last 2 years. This has been growing. The sport itself has been becoming more and more prominent. You now see a lot more female sports anchors. You see, when they show the men's football scores, they also show the women's football scores. Yeah. And I don't think that's like for no reason. Obviously people are interested. We're seeing record attendances at games. Obviously the game at Wembley was a massive turnout, possibly rivaled some of the men's games as well, which is amazing. But obviously you're going to be talking from a movement and a sports science field, so I'll leave this one to you because you're the expert.
I wouldn't say expert, but I have some insight. I think it's important. I suppose if you're dealing with female athletes, and certainly if I'm dealing with female athletes, it's something that I consider. But you're right. First and foremost, it's great to see the game growing in the way it's growing, and also for these athletes, and I know quite a few female footballers, that they're getting the praise they deserve, and they're getting the attention they deserve in their sport as well. And now having a daughter as well, I'm glad for her for the future that the women's game will be in a good place. So I worked with the women's team at Man City for a number of weeks, a number of months, and continued to work with some of the athletes. We did a big pre-season on tour with them, so I had a good contact time with the girls, and I saw some things that I thought were slightly different to the men's side of thing, and this is probably explained a lot of the time in the injuries that females experience in relation to their male counterparts. If we take the world of football and the sport of football, and injuries happen in our sport, unfortunately, we can do something about it, but sometimes they just happen, right? But I think we can actually take injuries as not just an unlucky connotation to them. There's actually a reason and a rationale behind them, and then if you understand that reason, rationale, then maybe you can set an intervention to offset some of these things that can be more controlled or maybe prevented, right? So any sport has got a number of injuries that it can have. So if I play football, if I play golf, if I play rugby, if I play whatever, there's type of injuries I could get for them, and we all know there are different types of injuries for those sports, right? So you have the sport, which is the overarching idea of what the injuries you could get in those sports, and then you have the mechanism, right? So the thing you're doing within that sport that gives you a type of injury. So for example, if I'm sprinting, I'm more likely to do my hamstring than I am ACL, right? And if I rotate or getting tackled or rotate on the planted foot or whatever it might happen, I'm more inclined to do my ACL than on my shoulder, and so on, right? So the mechanism denotes it. And then within the mechanism is the athlete. So a person's biomechanics, for me, is a rationale, and not the only reason, a rationale and an insight into why they got injured in the first place, right? So there can be a biomechanical failure that occurs in an athlete's, makeup that has allowed them or enabled them, or enable is probably not the word, but has caused them to get this type of injury. And if you can understand someone's biomechanics or their profile of what they are, then you can maybe answer some of the questions that you have. So when I said about the injuries are different to their male counterparts, it's usually in joint-based injuries are higher in females than in males, right? So muscle injuries are similar or are more in males and less in females, but joint injuries are higher in female sports. And in particular, ankles and knees. And in particular, if you dig deeper into the knee injuries, it's more ACLs in female sports. Now, if we just take that, we can take that for what it is. We can almost go down the route of many reasons why that is, right? And there's when an injury happens or anything happens, there's usually a variance to why that happened, right? So there's multiple factors why someone got injured, usually speaking, right? But there is a high proportion of a variance explained in certain things. Like, so, yeah, it could be the weather that explains maybe 5% of it. Yeah, it could be the surface. Yeah, it could be the sleep. And all these factors come into it. It's not never just one thing. And I'm not saying it's one thing. But I think one of the bigger variants of this would be their biomechanics, right? And if you understand their biomechanics, then you can understand what intervention they may need, right? So we'll try to get into it a little bit. If you were just to take, and this is from my experience working at men's, women's academy, is if you were to take just a random sample of a female and a random sample of a footballer, you would have, on average speaking, you would have female athlete being more mobile but less stable, and you'd have the male athlete being more stable and less mobile. Now, that's generic, okay? That's not in every individual, and of course there are different, there are males that are very hypermobile and they lack stability, and the other way you get females that are very mobile and very, you get a blend of all. But if you're taking an average, and if you look at the extremes of these, so if you look at the extreme mobility, hyper mobility person, you have more females in that end. And if you look at the hypomobility, have got no range, they're more males, and same with the stability, inverse relationship. You got males are typically more stable and females typically more unstable, right? So with all those factors coming in, and then you put your sport on top of it, same sport, same mechanism, now you got a higher incidence of ACLs versus the males. You can argue there's pitch and stuff like that, but they generally play on better pitches now, and it's generally better, and the same trends are still coming up. So I believe that it's down to biomechanics. Now, there's a few things that go on in biomechanics. You have the anthropometric, so you have the length of bones or the width of hips or whatever else, and females typically have wider hips because of obvious reasons with childbearing needs and stuff like that. So they have a wider, what we call a Q angle. So if your hips are slightly wider than your knees, you have this natural Q angle that they call it, right? So you have this
they taper in almost.
So they sort of come in rather than come straight down, if that's a very crude way of putting it. But there is that can happen. Now, that's not in every female or it's not in every male. And again, there's going to be, I'm generalizing here a little bit, but there is that natural deviation towards a higher Q angle than there is in males, right? So that is a factor, right? So you're already predisposing the knee in that way because it's not underneath it, it's slightly inside, which creates a bigger knee valgus and a greater inclination to go into that pattern of movement. But then on top of that, if you have a hypermobile hip, like if the hip has got loads of range and all that, and it lacks stability, that means basically I have loads of range, so I can go into loads of range, but I have no control mechanism to kind of prevent me going further into that range. So when you play the sport and it's a dynamic nature, you get forced into positions because the game dynamics, you get a push, you get a whatever it might happen, right? There's many things that kind of factor into that. But if your already hip is hypermobile and lacks stability, you now have a hip that kind of flies around in motion, right? You've got a deeper Q angle, and then often what will happen if you look at some mechanisms, not all the time, but some mechanisms, ACL injuries have happened where it's been a planted foot. So if my foot is planted, and I've got a foot here, so the foot is planted, so basically the arch is like in the floor, in the grass, right? That can't move now anywhere, right? So the motion happens, that hits the floor. Now my tibia that's on top of my foot is going to slow down because there is no falling down, there's no arch. So it stops it, so it slows down this tibia. Now, if you have a femur on top of that, which everyone has, and you have a hip that's flying around, you got the hip that's going to be traveling a lot faster now than a slowed down tibia because it's stuck in the floor. So you're going to create a greater torque at the knee. If you create a greater torque at the knee, that's open you up for more knee injuries. Yeah. Put that on top of a big, deeper Q angle, put that on top of a lack of stability, all the forces are going to go towards the knee. So I believe it's that rationale and it's that logic. Not explains every injury, don't get me wrong, there's other mechanics for you're doing your ACL. But in terms of rotation, non-contact injury where the foot is planted into the floor, I think a lot of it can be explained by a hip flying faster than the knee, and then, or maybe more accurately, a femur flying faster than the tibia, creating that torque at the knee. And if it's not controlled or there isn't a control mechanism in the body, then that leaves you more susceptible for knee injuries. So how that fits practically, if that sound rationale is there and you buy into it, or maybe people don't, but it's my kind of analysis of a situation, then if you have an athlete like this doing more mobility type exercises or doing more yoga based exercise for that particular individual is not going to be beneficial, because they already got a lack of control of that range. They need more stability. The range they already have is good enough to play football, but their control of that range is causing them to be inefficient, and it's causing them to be more open to knee injuries. So that issue has got to be addressed.
It sounds like from our previous conversations, there's a lot of different factors going on at any one time, and it could be a multiple of different reasons, as you've explained there. It could be the pitch, it could be, you know, the genetic makeup of the individual, it could be, you know, the shape of the hips in relation to the knees and all that kind of thing. It sounds like there's a lot going on, and what I've learned so far from yourself is that it can't just be one thing. It can't just be one issue. There's multiple things which affect injuries, which also affect how someone moves and how efficient they are. And it sounds like it's very much the same for the difference between the men's game and the women's game, which almost, you know, should heighten your appreciation for both, you know, both sexes playing the sport. You know, we're looking at female athletes who are the best at what they do in that specific sport. Now, there's an argument that, you know, maybe the women's game hasn't caught up to the men's game just yet, but obviously it's going to happen at some point where just the amount of people that watch the men's sport will watch women's sport, because the sport's always evolving, the players are always getting better, they're improving. We're seeing more and more cases of, you know, players who can do things that maybe you couldn't do 10 years ago. And we're seeing that obviously in the women's game. We're seeing players who just physically are just much better than some of their counterparts. So would you say there is a big difference between the two genders sport? Obviously, it's still the same game, still trying to play the same sport, but different factors are affecting the game differently, which means from your perspective as a sports scientist, you've almost got to treat it slightly different, and your approach has got to be a little bit more tactile. You can't just do exactly what you've done over there and apply it to B, because it might not have the same result.
Yeah. I often, and maybe I'm right or wrong in this, I don't really know, I often try not to compare them, you know, their own set. Like, I never compare sports.
No.
So I don't compare, you know, like men and women, like their own entity, you know, they're on their own journey, and they're at their own, whatever journey, part of their journey you're on. And I remember when I first joined City, like, the women's team wasn't a full-time entity. Some of these players were playing part-time, or some of them were full-time and some of them were part-time, and they were training with younger age squads in the academy. So really the game has gone through a massive transition. So they haven't had the sort of S&C support that a lot of the men's have. They haven't had other support by performance analysts, maybe physios, whatever it might be, right? So they haven't had the full, you know, wrap, like, fully for a long, consistent time. Like, only now academies have started, so they're going to get players through that are physically better, which is going to improve the game and whatever else. But then, that being aside, I still, you know, your question is, should they be, you know, treated differently in terms of their approach? I think yes, to the degree that injuries occur, you know. So I said it before, like, there is a different profile of injuries which need to be understood, I think, and not just be taken, it just happens in the sport. But why is the same sport with the same mechanism, the same whatever, is different outcomes?
It's analysing every micro and making sure that, because obviously your role within a club, and, you know, your responsibility is the players, and making sure that they're doing everything they physically can to make sure that they have a long, prosperous career. You know, you don't want to be getting injuries. They do happen, but breaking it down and looking at why has that happened. Let's not just say, oh, you've done your ACL, so that's it. Like, you know, let's delve into deeper. How do you find other sports scientists? What's the relationship in terms of, like, sharing information? Like, I imagine you've got colleagues who you speak to very frequently, but is it a guarded community? Is it very much people don't want to share with each other, or is it very much we're all just trying to get better, so let's share information? What forums is there for sharing, you know, evidence? Because ultimately that's what it is. It's evidence based, isn't it? It's not opinion. It's based on, right, what can we decipher from what has happened?
Yeah. Like, you have to go far and wide to find a nice environment where you can have an open, honest discussion about sports science, S&C, or whatever else. Because if you go to social media, I've said this before, it's horrible. It's almost horrible like platform to put across an idea, and no one's idea is fully fleshed out. Like what, even in your profession, any profession, what you're doing 5 years ago, hopefully was less than what you're doing now. So 5 years ago, you were less of a practitioner in whatever you were doing, or you're less of a performer or whatever. So in 5 years' time, you hopefully be better. So you never know when you're having a conversation with someone what part of the journey they're on, or how many years experience they've had, and whatever else. So I don't think yet we've kind of mastered this whole how we can share information and how we can have discussions, bar a one-to-one chat with your mate or your people you know or people you trust or whatever. But to have a lot of conversation with a lot of different people, you know, it happens on Twitter, but you see just more mob behavior. You know, you see people polarize their ideas. Like I was just saying there now about maybe the rationale, maybe there's more ACL injuries. It's one it's one explanation, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I put that out there as a statement, you're going to get a lot of, you know, backlash on that. You're going to get a lot of people disagreeing and whatever, but not disagreeing and like challenging the opinion and having a discussion. We just disagreeing and dismissive.
Yeah.
So that doesn't let anyone grow. That doesn't let us understand the environment better. That doesn't let us understand our athletes better or us as practitioners better. And certainly for the young practitioners coming through, I don't think that's a great place to learn from.
No, definitely not. I think what we're trying to do here is obviously driven by yourself. We're putting out the content that maybe someone in your field or, you know, a fan of football wants to hear. And we're talking maybe not about, you know, gossip behind what goes on in changing rooms, but like what's actually going on during training and, you know, during game time, so that we can appreciate players for what they are, whether that be men's football or women's football. You know, we're looking at some of the best athletes in their field, so we should just appreciate them for what they are. What we're trying to do here is give a forum for your ideas and also, you know, encourage debate on these issues. Obviously, you believe what you say, otherwise you wouldn't say it, but you're not saying this is a fact and it cannot be challenged. You're very much of the thought that, you can challenge me, because within that challenge, you might actually find something out that you didn't know. Yeah, and that mentality is where we should be aiming to take from football to every other aspect of, you know, of society, is trying to encourage a place of debate and discussion. You know, obviously you can't maybe get your opinion across in a tweet because you're only allowed so many characters, but maybe on this kind of format you're allowed to discuss things a little bit more at length, and also, you know, encourage participation and other ideas that might challenge your own, but in turn get you to a better destination. Yeah,
that's it. Like I don't feel like all my ideas are fully fleshed out. I don't think everything that I know is already presented to me. There's so much more to learn. I think what we don't know about the human body is far more than what we do know about the human body, and I'm on a search to figure that out more. And we finish on sort of just kind of come back circle on you know, I said about if you were to take an average male versus an average female, you'd have difference in opinion, the whole difference in profile. But the whole essence of all that is to go down to the molecular level, or as deep as you can go with the individual, because you don't know what you're going to be presented. And too often, I think as a profession, we go exercise first, and then we put the exercise on the individual. If you start with the individual and you figure out what it is they need, what it is they're looking for, like I said about yoga, for instance, yoga for some female athlete might be excellent, but if you don't know the whole profile of the person, then you can't go exercise first and then hopefully that fits across everybody. But if you look at the individual first and you break down them and understand them more, and you build it up from a principle level, and then you go all the way up into finally then, okay, what exercise would actually help this athlete, then you're on a better road to success, rather than exercise first and then apply that across the group. And I think that's where some of the failures have come. Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been, again, really insightful listening to the things that, you know, you can explain just so simply for someone who doesn't really understand it. So again, thank you for your time. No, Joe, I really enjoyed that once more. So yeah, guys, thanks for listening, and I hope you got something from it. And I'd like to hear your thoughts, so please feel free to comment and reach out if you need to.